The 4 Degrees to the Streets podcast explores neighborhood design and urban policy topics through the critical lens of equity to give listeners the tools needed to overcome structural and institutional barriers, and examines how the built environment shapes communities for better or worse. Tune in once a month to keep it 4 degrees to the streets.
I found this Texas RFP. The thing is 69 pages, y'all, just to read, right? In order for you to submit. So I say that because your submission could easily be longer than that. But how does a business owner even find time to submit when you look at stats that say 96% of Black-owned businesses are sole proprietorships, 90% of women-owned businesses are sole proprietorships. So a lot of us are out here doing this on our own, get a 69-page RFP, and we're like,
That was our guest, Jaime Coleman. Jaime is a seasoned diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist and community engagement leader. You can read her full bio in the show notes. Jaime joins us from no other than my home state, New Jersey. How you doing, Jaime?
Hey there, all is well on my end. Wish I sounded a bit better and was getting better sleep, but between all these kids, that's a little tough. But I'm good. I'm happy I'm here with you today.
It's great to have you, and I appreciate you for joining. And yes, getting childcare is something that we respect and talk about often on this podcast. So very glad that you were able to do that. You guys have all heard, or hopefully you have listened to our episode on equity in the local government budget process. So we did a follow-up episode to that in season 4, where we talked about the cities that are doing that good work. And that episode was inspired by some of the work that we did with the city that Jaime worked in North Carolina. So really happy to have her finally on the show. She's provided a lot of opportunities for the podcast in terms of consulting and things. Jaime, I want to highlight the work that you've done in the state of New Jersey around yoga. And I think that gets into some of the stuff we're going to talk about in this episode also. So just talk briefly about what that experience was like for you and the impetus for wanting to do some of those yoga programs you were doing in Trenton, I believe it was.
Trenton, yeah, absolutely. So born and raised in Mercer County, New Jersey, and the pandemic brought me back home. I'm like, why am I paying DC rent when I don't have to report into work at Georgetown? So moved back home and had learned that Trenton was a recent recipient of this major grant dedicated to health and wellness. But at the same time, the pandemic was still so fresh and new. So I walked my behind to City Hall or into City Hall. And I said, hey, I understand that the city of Trenton just won this grant. The pandemic has people feeling all sorts of kind of ways in terms of socialization or loneliness, as well as the social justice movement was at its peak at that time, with people protesting frequently about the murder of George Floyd. And then here I am with this fresh new yoga certificate, but nowhere to use it to teach. So I was like, I'd love to offer a yoga series as both a physical wellness option or initiative, as well as something to just get people around each other, but in a safe way. And City of Trenton was on board. I did that at Cowwater Park, summer 2020, 21. I was pregnant, 21. So my brothers took over the last 2 summers of 22 and 23, and then we took off for 24. But that was really cool. And then from Trenton, we expanded to Lawrence, which is my actual hometown. Lawrence Township was open to it as well. So just wanted to give back to my community in a way that I knew I could. It might not seem, let me think. It might not seem super connected to social justice, but again, it was something that I could do to contribute, to make an impact, to get people around each other, especially Black people doing yoga in Trenton, right? So,
and I think the emphasis on yoga, which is a physical practice, but it has a lot of mental benefits, I think is really important, especially at the time of the world. And even still now, I participate in something very similar here in LA. So I'm grateful to hear that you were doing that. And so the conversation that we're going to have today is one that we have really never touched on in the podcast. And so I'm super excited to have this conversation around supplier diversity and equity in the local government and federal and state. We're going to touch on all 3 levels. Procurement process. And so what does that mean broadly? So you have a government, let's just take a city, for example. They have all these services and goods that they might need to contract out with a business. That's procurement. It's going out and externally getting a good or a service from another provider that you yourself and your organization does not provide. And so just to put some things in perspective, the United States government, the federal government, is the largest consumer of goods and services in the world. Last year, well, 2022 actually, they spent $650 billion. So for example of some of the goods that they might procure, for let's say the Department of Transportation, they might procure a train. They're not Department of Transportation, the DOT doesn't build their own trains or buses. So they might procure a company who builds trains and buses to sell them trains and buses. They might also purchase like light bulbs for those vehicles. They're not going to have those. They're going to purchase those from another company. If you think of services, you could think of the Department of Homeland Security. They might procure a maintenance person to go work on the machines that you see in the airport at the security checkpoint. As the largest consumer in the world, it is important for governments in the US to practice supplier diversity and procure or purchase goods or services from a diverse range of business owners. This helps us avoid giving a financial advantage to one particular type of business owner over another. How do you feel about that kind of explanation, Jaime?
Yeah, I think you broke that down really well, especially starting out with the dollar amount. You said 650 billion with a B, right? And we need to equitably disperse those funds in order to boost small businesses. Historically, businesses owned by traditionally marginalized communities, historically excluded, heck, even presently excluded businesses. So I think you broke that down really well.
Talk to me about what some of those different categories of business owners or groups that are kind of in the, I won't call them protected classes because it's not exactly that, but what are some of those different categories of business owners that when we're thinking about equity and procurement, we're kind of focused on?
Yeah, so we'll start with hubs and MWBE. So hub, historically underutilized businesses. The ownership must be comprised of at least 51% women, minorities, I'm using air quotes for that word, y'all, and I'll explain why, or service disabled veterans. And then MWBE stands for Minority Women Business Enterprises. So minority is defined as one or more of the following races or ethnic categories: Hispanic or Latino, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, Asian and American Indian or Alaskan Native. Now, I use air quotes for minority because it's an outdated term. It minimizes the influence of these groups, right? And when you put all of those groups together, we make up the global majority. So we honestly need to update that term. But those are two major categories. I sometimes make the mistake of using them interchangeably, but here's what I learned working in North Carolina. I worked with the North Carolina Department of Administration to offer hub workshops, and I worked with NCDOT, North Carolina Department of Transportation, to offer DBE workshops. So different organizations offer different contracts, certifications, etc., based on, whether they use a term or prefer hubs or MWBEs. So still need clarification on that, but if that helps you keep it in check, it has helped me a lot.
Thank you for explaining the different categories because I do think that often they get lumped together as just like, these are all our goals. We're going to try to work on them individually. But I think having the separation is important because you can easily begin to, if you think of them all as one giant category, it's very easy to start to favor one in that category over the other without paying attention to the complexities between each of them.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And I want to touch on a few more. SBEs, small business enterprises, right? It speaks about the size and scope of an organization. And then DBEs, disadvantaged business enterprises, which indicates that the business owner or owners must come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. So many acronyms. That's just part of working in or with government. But yeah, we have to know the difference so that we know what certifications apply to us. And that we can, and so that we can get all of the ones that do apply to us, so that we can get these contracts and tap into that $650 billion number that you mentioned.
While we have identified it, I think it's also important to talk about the definition of equity, especially in the procurement space. And so this definition I was able to find is from the United States Small Business Administration. And it was included in a working paper that they have where they were trying to source together as many it's like a literature review of what is currently going on in the procurement space. And so I'm not going to read the full definition, and the full definition is about like 2 paragraphs. I will highlight some of the pieces that I thought were relevant. And so I'll begin to read a definition now. While equality is defined as uniformity in access to opportunities between groups, equity is defined as uniformity in outcomes between groups who have experienced social, economic, demographic, or geographic disparities due to unfair, unjust, and exclusionary policies and practices. In the context of federal procurement, equity is achieved when groups who have experienced such disparities have access to procurement opportunities, are able to compete for them, and receive a fair share of federal procurement spending that is proportionate to their prevalence in the industry. They end the definition by saying policies, programs, and procedures need to be designed at all stages of procurement to address systemic barriers and exclusionary practices, including and not limited to helping entrepreneurs create and scale their businesses, ensuring that business owners are aware of federal procurement opportunities, supporting the business in the process of competing for those opportunities, and enabling businesses to successfully execute awarded contracts. Any thoughts on the definition?
No, I appreciate what you said about access, because you're right. Again, we can enter in access spaces, ask questions, find the contracts, but that doesn't mean that we'll be awarded them. I'm happy that there is a definition for equity, and I know that probably feels like the bar is on the floor, but in some cases and situations it is. So I'm happy that, the time is even taken to define it. No other thoughts beyond that. I want to see us act on these definitions, though, obviously, right? So that's why we're here talking about this.
I'll speak briefly before passing it back off to Jaime on what the current, at least for the federal government, what their current targets are in this space. And so they have a chart that breaks down what for each fiscal year. So it's basically I don't want to use the word a quota, but it is certainly a similar thing to a quota, where they have a certain percentage of federal dollars designed to be is set aside for each of the different business categories. And so they started having these supplier diversity and equity in the procurement process goals in 1988. Those goals are outlined in a code. They're in the commerce and trade section of our United States federal code. And so it is codified in legal terms and effectiveness. So I think that is helpful, that it's not just like an internal document. It is like set at the federal level in the Congress. And so under each category, they have a certain percentage of their procurement dollars that they want to spend. And so for small businesses, they want to spend not less than 23% of all prime contracts for the fiscal year. Women-owned businesses, not less than 5% of prime and subcontracts. Small disadvantaged businesses, not less than 12% of prime contracts and 5% of subcontracts. Historically underutilized business zones, not less than 3% of prime and subcontracts, and service disabled veteran owned, not less than 3% of prime and subcontract. So the word prime and subcontract is relevant here because a prime contract means that you're the primary recipient of the contract. Okay, I'm the Department of Transportation and I'm looking for a company to build trains for the next EV train system. And so the prime contractor is that main company who is building the trains and selling them to the Department of Transportation. A subcontractor would be another company that has a contract with that larger company. So DOT hires ABC EV train producer, and ABC EV train producer gets an additional contract with XYZ train producer, and that would be the subcontractor. And so what this is saying is that they have goals for both the prime and subcontract. And I know this in the real estate and like urban planning spaces that minority owned businesses in particular have been a lot of recipients of those subcontract roles. If you think about building the renovations of and the rebuilding of the World Trade Center, there were tons of minority owned businesses that participated in that, but as subcontractors. And it's a good opportunity, but it doesn't lead to the big dollars that the prime contractor is having. Finally, on this point, when I read these categories, to me, it felt like a small number, right? 3% of possibly $650 billion is a lot of money because it's a percentage of a lot. But it also didn't feel like it was an earth-shattering goal or a big target for them to hit.
Yeah, the number is low, especially when you just think about how many small businesses there are, right? When you think about that dollar amount, the number is extremely low. And I think what is even more disheartening is that many agencies don't hit the number. And it's single digit numbers, it's a goal that I think perhaps too many agencies see as aspirational and not as a true commitment that they put resources behind, and therefore it's seen as optional, something nice to do instead of something that must be done.
We're going to take a look at how agencies are doing at multiple levels and get an understanding of how both the federal and state governments are achieving these goals. And states do have different procurement goals that are different than the federal government. And so I'll just quickly kick it off with another federal example. You can find for each federal department, at least on the United States Small Business Administration website, agency level scorecards where they take each department, DOT, HUD, Defense, all the different departments, and they rank how they performed annually on their supplier diversity and equity and procurement goals. And so in 2023, the federal government reached this target in each of those small business categories. Only two departments, which are the Department of Health and Human Services and the Environmental Protection Agency, did not reach their goals on each of the categories. Looking back over each of the years since 2021, the areas where each of the departments kind of outperform is in the small business, service disabled, veteran owned, and disadvantaged small business categories. They struggle to reach their targets for women owned businesses and businesses in those hub zones, which I think is expected. I would expect them to struggle in those two categories and kind of be able to do better in the general small business, the service disabled veteran, and the disadvantaged small business categories.
Yeah, thanks for that breakdown. I'm happy to jump into the states. So starting out with a state that has some work to do, our home state, New Jersey. And I'm tracking this as a New Jersey resident. New Jersey just released their disparity study in January 2024. And that thing is riddled with red ink. Disparity, disparity, disparity. I mean, across almost every category: construction, prime contracts, professional services, prime contracts, formal goods and services. The list goes on. So this is alarming for several reasons. New Jersey, if I had to guess, is a pretty diverse state, and I probably should have done that research to see, like, hello, there are businesses absolutely that identify as hubs, MWBEs, etc. Why aren't they getting these opportunities? The study revealed that Black-owned businesses receive 1% or less of state contracts in all industries. Okay. I got from the study that something needs to happen, right? It's one thing to pay for the study and get it done. But again, now what? We know this information. How do we do better? And I think because the study was just released in January of this year, we all, anybody who's tapped in, tuned in, are waiting to see how New Jersey will respond, because there needs to be an uptick in numbers. So that's New Jersey. Okay, we'll hopefully link the disparity study in the show notes. Great. And then on the flip side of that, a state that is doing really well, our neighbor right to the north, New York. All right. New York continues to lead the nation in MWB utilization. Their annual goal for FY23 was 30%, and they actually exceeded that by 30, making it a total of 32.3%. So, and preparing for this episode, I'm like, how? How do we, how are we even in double digits, and then how are we exceeding these goals that we meet? And from what I can see, again, I'm not a New Yorker, I don't work in New York state government, but just from what I was able to read, it appears that leadership is behind this initiative, and that is huge, y'all. As somebody who worked in local government in a role that came with its beautiful challenges, when leadership is behind you and puts real resources behind what it is you're working on, it makes a huge difference. So in 2014, Governor Cuomo pledged to increase MWB certification by an additional 2,000 businesses. And the state actually exceeded that goal in January 2016, right? And as a result, the number of state certified firms has more than doubled in just 5 years. So I think that is causing not just meeting the goal, but exceeding the goal. And then the Governor Hochul, I hope I'm pronouncing these names correctly, continued to put real resources and importance behind this. So they again were able to exceed the goal, and two major things happened. The state of New York eliminated their certification backlog. So instead of businesses just sitting, waiting to find out if they've been certified or not, or what they need to work on in order to get the certification, they cleared the backlog. Again, huge deal in government where things are very antiquated. Some government entities, probably more at the local level, I would hope, than the state level, are still doing things in paper, y'all, in the good year of 2024.
The state level still uses paper. Up until 2020, up until the pandemic, the state of New Jersey was using paper.
Yeah, unacceptable, because how do we track that if these papers get lost, and not sustainable? Come on, let's do better. So the elimination of the backlog was one part of what I was able to see really helped. And then another sort of initiative or action was faster MWBE certification review. So they were able to cut down the processing time from 90 to 120 days to about cut it in less than half. They eliminated over 75% of that time. I want to get my wording right with the maths. But all of that to say, the state of New York, again, put real time and energy behind helping small businesses, hubs, MWBEs, et cetera, get certified. And therefore, were able to meet, and not just meet, but exceed their goal.
In the New Jersey report, did they produce any of their own recommendations on how to improve their numbers?
I need to do a better job of reading the report. Full transparency, it is 221 pages, right? So of course the report in there are considerations and examples from other states. I want to make sure I do New Jersey justice and not say, no, there were no recommendations, because I truly didn't go deep enough to see that. But I will say that several chambers and advocacy groups have come up with their own recommendations or have provided assistance in order to address this. The main one that I follow has been the African American Chamber of Commerce. They immediately had a town hall, and they're very, obviously connected in business throughout the state and want to see something happen. So I'm hoping that there are some collaborations that come out of this in order to make necessary improvements.
I think the recommendations on how to improve equity in the government procurement process are definitely needed, because I remember reading a long time ago about federal contracts, and where we talked about how the federal government is seemingly meeting all of their supplier diversity goals. The Department of Transportation is one that was listed as meeting their goals. But what's interesting is that once you start to peel back in those numbers, right, and you want to say, okay, we said we met our minority owned business goal, and you start to peel back the numbers and say, well, who were the businesses and who were the business owners? You do start to find that there are some, even within the different quote unquote minority categories, Black, Hispanic, Asian American, Pacific Islander, you start to find that some demographics are promoted over others. And I think often we see that minority Black, African American is often the least included. I know for Department of Transportation, they were having a similar issue that only less than 1% of the federal contracts from the DOT were going to Black minority owned businesses. And so it is important to be able to parse out the data and really be able to see, because to the point we made earlier, if you don't understand, right, we have the different categories, where there are about 6 of them in total in terms of the different business types. But even within the 6, there are other racial and ethnic categories. And I think it's very important not to start to lump together, because then you just create a different disparity that maybe you weren't thinking about it, but that could be in the result also.
Yeah, that's a great point. The one area where there is less red in the New Jersey report is in subcontractor disparities. And to your point, the groups that have no disparity are Hispanic Americans and Caucasian females. So women, white women are receiving more of these contracts, right? And so are Hispanic Americans, at least in the subcontractor categories. But again, as you go deeper and look at specific racial categories and not just lump them all together, you can see that there's a clear difference in who is being awarded the contracts.
And so we will switch over and think about the businesses who might be listening to the podcast. And so, what is the process of getting a government contract at a high level? What does it look like for me? Shoot, me, a podcaster, what would that look like for me to go through the process of getting a government contract at any of the levels?
Yeah, I was really looking forward to this part because I feel like this is my jam. Government has to get on board, right? And I found that I was able to make an impact while working in government. Look, I was able to hire y'all. I took my little baby budget and put some to the side for you all. So that is supplier diversity in and of itself. And even my work with Trenton. So we've given 2 examples already, of supplier diversity, but really want to talk to the businesses here. How do you get this money? Okay. So first things first, to find out about the opportunities, recommend Bonfire. I have an account, but there are others as well. BidNet, and then Subnet is specifically for subcontracting opportunities. And if you're interested in federal opportunities, sam.gov. And please, please, please get added to the vendor list of these websites or of the municipalities closest to you or municipalities that you'd like to work with. Okay. So you've done that. You found a contracting opportunity that you want to apply for. Okay. Next, pay attention to the deadline. There is no flexibility with these deadlines. Typically, they range from 2 to 4 weeks. I've seen more time allocated though. So, just keep that in mind, 2 to 4 weeks to knock out a very lengthy process. All right. Next, I want to encourage you all to have a network to collaborate with. Okay. I'm good at many things, but many of these RFPs require some sort of technical aspect, right? Hypothetically, not my area of expertise. Okay. So I need to be aligned with somebody who can take care of the tech aspect or the data aspect while I do the focus groups, hypothetically. Okay. So please have a network to collaborate with. And then maybe you all decide from there who will be the prime, who will be the sub, who on the team is missing, so that you can complete a comprehensive proposal. All right. After that, submit in all caps. Once you have done the work and seen it, if you even think there is a chance you could be awarded this opportunity, you have to submit for the opportunity. Do not psych yourself out and say, oh, I need more experience. Oh, I need another reference. I need to do this another 2, 3, 5 years. No, submit. Okay. Click the button, send it in. All right. Other things I just want to make note of: do your research. Because so I had an experience submitting an RFP. I've only done it one time and it was so long, and that's probably why I've only done it once, but I would have been one of the subs. It was 4 Black women. One had a tech company. One was a just really talented, skilled recruiter. The other specialized in community engagement. And then you had me, who Also really strong in community engagement, strong in facilitation, but I worked in local government, right? I know the lingo, I know how to navigate the space. All of that to say, we were really stuck on the pricing part, y'all. And I am not a woman who is scared to ask for what I need financially. I'm not a Black person who's scared to do that either. Like, the price is the price, and either you can meet it or not. But we wanted to be realistic about how much we were asking for. So most governmental records you can access, right, online, hopefully. And we were able to find that the city we were submitting for had just allocated X amount of dollars to this project. So we knew we needed to be within that, we'll say hypothetically $800,000, right? So do your research. If you can find out that sort of information, or go back and watch some city council meetings or meetings related to the project, that can help a lot. Other quick tidbits: if there is an optional, in quotes, pre-submission meeting, do not see it as optional, see it as mandatory. You need to attend those meetings to ask questions. You need to attend those meetings to meet other contractors. Again, that's how you put together a really good, solid team that can check all of the boxes that's required for the project and get the contract. I'll pause there really quick, see what you think about any of that.
I think the bid number and the money piece is a very important part, because I think a lot of governments, they use a lowest bidder kind of structure. And so, because everyone's trying to, make a penny last 15 times. And so it can be challenging, I imagine, to figure out that number, right? Because you want to win the award, but would you be mad if you only asked for 800, but the budget was 1,200, and you could have had this, that $400 right there. And so, and there are organizations, the research piece I think you thought of was excellent, right? Are there city council meetings where they already talked about how much money they're going to allocate towards this? Those pre-submission meetings, you can go in and kind of figure out where this line item might be in the budget. But there's also, to your point of having a network, a lot of like small business advisory organizations and consultants that will help you work through submitting that RFP, but also help you figure out what your financial request should be, and like how to mark up, okay, here's what your time costs and how to mark that up. So it's interesting. And I've had the pleasure of submitting RFPs, not for my own business, but for a research proposal that I was working on when I was a graduate research assistant, and they are a very lengthy process. But I think the one point I would mention is fully understand your why. And that just goes on for most things. But if you understand why your business exists, how this contract with whatever municipality or state government or federal government will expand upon that, I think everyone wants to always hear a good story, and a good story goes a really long way. And I think that's part of the process also.
Yeah, absolutely. And in preparation for this, I was able to find an actual RFP with the due date that's upcoming, and I wanted to see if there was anything else I could potentially add to walk the group through or just keep in mind, right? So I found this Texas RFP due October 1st. The thing is 69 pages, y'all, just to read, right? In order for you to submit. So I say that because your submission could easily be longer than that based on all of the documents they need from you, okay? But how does a business owner even find time to submit when you look at stats that say 96% of Black-owned businesses are sole proprietorships, 90% of women-owned businesses are sole proprietorships. So a lot of us are out here doing this on our own, get a 69-page RFP, and we're like, no time. So again, network so that you don't feel like you are doing this on your own. That particular office has a goal of 39% SBE allocations or contracts awarded. So an SBE will likely be one of the organizations at least considered, if not chosen, for this. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything as it relates to race or gender, but again, just something to keep in mind, and even include that in your research. What is their SBE or DBE, excuse me, MWBE goal, all the acronyms. And then last thing I'll say is that in this RFP and then others I've seen that I've been interested in putting my, name in the hat for, but also just in working in local government and reading them, there were at a very basic level, these three things that you absolutely needed. You need the certifications, period. You have to have them prior to starting the work. So go ahead, once you get your LLC, you get your business registered, apply for the certifications immediately. You need insurance. Different municipalities have different insurance requirements, but at a bare minimum, you have to have insurance, and you need references. Now that one is tough. How do I get a reference saying that I can do the work outlined in this RFP if this will be the first time I'm doing this comprehensive or wide range of this exact work? So I know that's a little tough, but just get creative with work that is similar. Other agencies or organizations that can at least speak to the quality of your work, even if it's not that exact work, and include them.
I think the only piece that I'll bring up here is not to sleep on or be discouraged by being a subcontractor. I think it's very easy to feel like I've been doing my business for a year or 2 years and I want to be the prime contractor, but there's a lot of learning that can come from allowing someone else to be like the main person and you go supporting them and moving along the process with them. And I say that because I'm going to put the link to it in the show notes, but there's a developer who is he worked on an RFP in Minnesota, I believe it was, for HUD. Now, getting one of those HUD Choice Neighborhood grants is a very difficult process. They're like $1 billion of money to redo an entire neighborhood and all of this stuff. And I listened to him on a news article, and he was basically saying that in order for him to get his first prime contract, he worked as a subcontractor on like 25 different real estate transactions. Just getting that experience and getting familiar with what the process is like, not necessarily in the background, but not as the primary person that's being called on day in and day out. And that experience for him was super helpful, being able to go out and get his first prime contract. But because to your point, he had all those references as a subcontractor.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Like, listen, a portion of zero is zero, okay? But a portion of $800,000 is a lot greater than zero, okay? So you don't need to be the prime. Work on as many projects as you can as a sub in order to be ready for that prime opportunity.
And so, as we get towards the end of this episode, this wonderful episode, what are some resources available to them? I know you mentioned a few of the websites, and all this will be in the show note, but any resources you can think of that are available to businesses as they start to think about readying themselves for government contracts?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with the business development side first. I want to plug SCORE. They offer free and confidential business mentoring services. Highlight the Small Business Development Center. They're typically housed at local colleges. So I get business mentoring from someone based at the College of New Jersey, free. She's super helpful, right? So those are two very helpful, rather easily accessible resources. And then in general, in your area, look into business accelerators, incubators, entrepreneur support systems. Your local chamber can help. Tap into that entrepreneurial ecosystem and try to go to events if and when you can. And then for a government contract specifically, so you find a contract in X city or state, look up that municipality's office of purchasing or procurement office or supplier diversity team. The names may vary, but please do your research, find that government webpage related to that, and then attend any events or workshops that they have, and feel free to reach out directly. I heard this from a consultant that I met briefly in North Carolina by the name of LaPronda Span. And she was like, the first time these government employees hear from you shouldn't be when you're asking for millions of dollars. And that makes sense, right? Like I wouldn't just meet Jasmine and say, hey, right? You need to build these relationships early so that when you are ready to submit the RFP, again, there's some sort of knowledge or they're familiar with perhaps your name, your scope of work, etc.
And I'll just highlight one on the West Coast. To your point, it is housed at community college. I forget which one it is in the Bay Area, but the company is 510 Media Foundation. They do a weekly mentorship and business leadership class. Like it's in the university. It's like a class you can register for and take. And I've sat in on like their YouTube versions of it, and it's a great course. So as you guys know, we love to end our episodes with some takeaways. And I will allow my guest, Jaime, to lead with her takeaways from today's episode and kind of the research and things we've talked about.
Yeah, thanks, Jasmine. 3. The first is sort of like a call to action for you. If you're a small business, again, submit. Find a way to be ready for these RFPs and submit in order to tap into those funds. And then if you're on the government side, please make sure your government entity is taking this seriously. Go outside of just who you know and who you have worked for or worked with, excuse me, who you have worked with, and find businesses that you can start to award these contracts to. So that's my first one. My next one, look, I'm gonna do a quick plug or ask to say I am looking to now tap into the entrepreneurial ecosystem in New Jersey, primarily Central Jersey, because that's where I'm based. So super open to any resources that folks want to share, even with me, as a result of listening to this, so that I can be as tapped in here as I was in North Carolina. And then last but not least, it's just a huge, huge, huge thank you. Folks may not know this, but I started out as a fan of the podcast and still a fan. I just found myself listening to all the episodes, went through this phase where I was like, dang, I should have studied planning. And I tweeted like, where are the planning resources? Send me all the book recommendations, send me the podcast. And through a mutual friend, I was able to find 4 Degrees to the Streets, listen to every episode. And I'm like, I need to reach out. Got y'all's contact info from the mutual friend. Tell them I'm not, extra or being extra. I just need to know them. And went from listening to the podcast to inviting you all to work with my municipality, not once, but twice, to now being a collaborator. And I'm super grateful.
It's so much love, Jaime. I'm so grateful for our relationship and the friendship that's blossoming. And I'm just really grateful for you. And I'm looking forward to everything that you have moving forward. I'm very excited. My takeaway for today's episode is a really simple one. If a majority of those federal departments are consistently hitting the procurement goals, then we should probably raise them.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is raise the bar, period.
Let's step it up. So that has been the episode. I appreciate you all for listening. All of our notes will be in the description, so you can find any of the links. Jaime's contact information will also be in there if you want to reach out to her for any and everything. I appreciate all of you guys listening. We'll be back next month because now we are doing episodes once a month as opposed to every other week. You can find us on Instagram at the number 4 degrees pod. You can send us an email. You can tap in with us on all of the different podcast streaming platforms. And we'll see you next month. Peace out, y'all.